Welcome to Revenue Harvest, a podcast about the fundamentals of sales leadership. Did you know most sales teams don't hit their sales targets? And you can't afford to miss yours. This podcast will give you the answer to questions that will help you lead your team better, consistently exceed your sales targets, and make the most of your career. I'm your host, Nigel Green, and the whole idea behind these conversations is to learn from people who can make you a better sales leader. Let's get started. Nicole, welcome. How are you?
I'm great, Nigel. How are you?
I'm good. So 9 years we've been friends. And I was thinking about 9 years of friendship. And I remember very early in our friendship, we were at a conference at a hotel in Palm Beach, Florida. And I was quickly trying to build a sales team. And you sat down with me and talked to me about your process for interviewing and hiring. And it built my base, my foundation for interviewing salespeople, hiring them in a way that was systemic and repeatable. How many people do you think you've hired in your career?
Gosh, that's a good question. I would say, and this is a rough estimate, 400-ish.
400 salespeople, more specifically, 400 salespeople.
That's
in your
correct.
career.
Yep.
So if you've hired 400, how many do you think you've interviewed?
Well, just yesterday I interviewed 2. So, I mean, this is again a rough estimate, likely around 10 to 12 for every salesperson I selected.
So 10 times that. So we're talking 4,000, 4,500 interviews.
That's right. Wow. When you put it in perspective, it's
a lot. That's why I wanted to talk to you about interviewing salespeople, because I know you've done it more than maybe anyone else I know. On the spectrum of all the things that are important to a sales leader, and now you lead teams of sales managers. So you have teams of managers that have teams of sellers, and you've been doing that for a long time. When you're thinking about the competencies of a manager, where is hiring on that importance spectrum?
It's actually, I look at it as number one. I mean, I think
of all things, number one.
Of all things. Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Well, because I believe that the fastest way to improve company performance is to improve the talent of the team. And, whether we want to admit it or not, it's we want to select mini-me's of ourselves. And if you think about hiring success for anyone, and I mean anyone, it's about 50%. And so just thinking about that, in a result of that is the fact that we do have to interview a lot. But putting a system in place for yourself, it can help that number, that 50%. But it can make or break you as a leader, right? Any salesperson that you bring on your team, that can make you or break you.
So I know your process has probably evolved over time. Let's lift up the hood. What is your process today as it stands, or the process that you try to get your sales managers to adhere to? Yeah.
So we look at it's 5 different things, and it's not necessarily a step by step. It's just core components of what I would call a selection process. And the first, and you and I have spent a lot of time on this together too, which is thinking about what it is you're looking for. And I like to think of it as not the job description, but defining exactly what you want in a salesperson. And it's not about the description. It's really about thinking about the outcomes that you want from that salesperson. And so that in turn helps you create the competencies that you're looking for. So that's the first. The other, and I'll just talk high level, and if we want, we can dig into each.
Well, before we go to the next one, Give me an example of because if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking exactly what I want, what might be something in your world that you want? What's a tangible thing?
So in my industry that I'm in today, we look at occupancy, right? So it's different in every industry, but there's always metrics. And having a score, by the way, having a scoreboard or having very clearly defined metrics is really what I'm referring to. And so if occupancy is our ultimate goal and there's a certain target for that, we look at conversion rates. And so when you kind of break this down to create your competencies, you start with the outcomes that you're looking for. And so if I'm looking for someone that creates, let's say, I'm just going to use a rough estimate, 30 leads a month, and in turn takes those leads and converts them to what we call tours, and then we take the tours and convert those to move-ins, we have to look for a strength in a salesperson that can convert. That is created by persistence. That's created by grit. And so looking at the outcomes and then defining, working backwards in a sense, and defining, okay, with that outcome that we're looking for, what is then the criteria? What is the competency that we're looking for?
Okay, so that's the first kind of set of competencies. What is it that we really want? What else?
Yeah, so I mean, just thinking through that one thing, if we stick on that point for a little bit, just thinking through what else you want. And so also combining that with industry data if you have it. So for our industry, we know, think about this for a second, we know that from the time the inquiry or lead comes in to the time we can get them to move in, it takes about 21 touch points and 18 hours. So if you sit on that for a second,
That's more than 1 an hour.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And so what are you looking for in a salesperson that, on average, it takes 21 touch points and 18 hours? You're looking for someone that does have a lot of persistence and does have a lot of grit. And so taking that competency and thinking through, how do I identify that in a candidate? And therein lies where you create your interview questions.
So then what are the other 4 in your overall process?
Yeah, so if you think about, so this is just one key component. So what I described is the interview questions, creating the interview questions. We also focus on build a bench. And so you asked earlier, how important is this as part of my role, as part of any leader's role? I believe it should be number one. But that is building a bench, and that requires a lot of persistence as well. A lot of people say that building the bench, creating a team of people that's ready to come on your team when you're ready for them. People say it's important, but I always say, show me your schedule and I'll see the truth, because your schedule doesn't lie. And so as leaders, it's having that on your calendar every week and sometimes every day. But building the bench. The other one is having a solid selection process. And I'll just share the last two. The fourth for us or for me is reference interviews. They can be the biggest waste of time, or they can be one of the most valuable tools that you use. Reference checks. And then last but not least is what I would call other tool categories. So we use Predictive Index. We do some time management exercises with our team as part of the selection process. We sometimes have peers involved in the selection process. And this may or may not be unusual for some people, but we'll sit down and have dinner with, or lunch or coffee, not only with the candidate, but with their support system. And that could be a family member, that could be a partner, a husband, wife, what have you. So those are things that I look for.
Okay, so I want to go back to 2 things in the 5 kind of core areas. Mm-hmm. You talked about building a bench. Mm-hmm. And I know that there are a lot of leaders that are thinking, well, how do I build a bench when I may not have an open position? So tell me how you train your people to think about recruiting for the future, as if you're future stating, even when you may not yet have an opening. Because the point you're trying to make is that what we know to be true is that your best salespeople will leave, and they always leave at the most highly inconvenient time. And the extent to which you can have someone ready to step in it's a security measure in your ability to stay on track, not get behind your goals, and keep the team moving forward. So how do you do that when you may not have a job to talk about?
So we always have it posted or available for people to see. And it's interesting because people reach out at the most random times, and it's not a salesperson in a certain territory or certain geography. It's just posted. So in all of our openings, it's just always in existence. It's always there. So that's one. The other one is, we call it team membering. Other companies may have different names for it, but it's making a very intentional effort to ask the team, if they were to go to battle with one person in their life from a sales perspective, who would that person be? And it's not just asking once, it's asking over and over and over again. And it could be asking in one-on-ones. It could be visiting them in the field and asking them. And so keeping that, always be thinking about who is your next bench player. But I will tell you, it can get risky. If you don't have that culture of work diligently to replace yourself, and you don't make that known with your sales team, they may hold back on sharing. They may hold that close to their chest, sharing that information. But super important to us, part of the culture of working diligently to replace yourself. And so continuously asking. We posted on LinkedIn. But I would even back up a step further. I would even say it's how you position the role as well, Nigel. So words create worlds, right? How do you describe the role, even the sales role? How do you describe that at your company? And so the job description is really important. I think sometimes we fail just there, how we describe our role at our company. Sometimes it just sounds boring. It sounds corporate. It sounds micromanaging. And so that alone is really, really important. It's part of building the bench, how you describe your sales role.
So a clear takeaway there is the job description that goes in the HR file is probably not the same job description you want to put on the company webpage and on LinkedIn.
It's not.
So what are the differences there? Because I think that's something that, if you go look at the jobs, it's roles and responsibilities. It's not selling the opportunity.
Right. So yeah, I'm just going to use my life right now, just as my frame of reference. So when I first started in this industry, this is going to blow your mind, by the way. When I got here, our salespeople were called marketers. They were called marketers. And I'm thinking, there's an issue here. There's a major issue here. So flip the script, right? Separated sales and marketing completely. You're not a marketer, you're a salesperson. Can't hide behind that. What I quickly realized in this industry is there were tons of hearts. I mean, hearts were everywhere. Senior living attracts hearts. But the hunter portion was missing. And I think it was because the industry changed so quickly. And it was this mentality of build it and they will come. And so we dubbed the term hunter with a heart. And that's very intriguing to people in this industry. And so that's someone that can sit with people in one of the most difficult times of their lives, but at the same time help people make a decision, stand in their gap, ask the really challenging questions. And that's part of the job description. So it's creating that culture, bringing that, going back to the core competencies and criteria that we shared earlier, what it truly is the role, and making it fun and actually coordinating it with your culture.
You said, show me your calendar and that'll tell me what's important. So do you, like when you're checking in with your hiring managers that have open spots, are you asking to see that? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, the reason why I say that, so we also have a sales success framework. And so what that means, great sales leaders, great salespeople don't want to be micromanaged, but it does help to create a framework, or, some people call it a playbook. Not a very intensive playbook, but something, right? Something that's been created by those closest to the work. One of our pillars of our framework is begin a week with a plan. And so my belief is, like I just said earlier, show me your calendar and I'll show you the truth, because your schedule doesn't lie. And in sales, you have to protect your time. You have to protect your sales time. And so from a sales leadership perspective, if one of your number one priorities is creating talent on your team, and you do believe and you connect the dots, that will change your business. It will change your company. Then it better be on your schedule. And so if you're building your bench and you're consciously making an effort to build your bench, putting it on your calendar as your priority, that'll show you, right? And so even if you don't have an interview scheduled, but you put it on your calendar, let's say it's an hour a day, or let's say on Tuesday it's 3 hours time blocked to build your bench. It's looking at your LinkedIn. It's connecting with that person that you talked to last month that's not quite ready, and maybe you're not quite ready. to bring on a new salesperson. But you're consistently thinking about it because it's in your calendar. If it's not there, it's not going to happen. It's just going to be the first thing to drop from your calendar.
So sometimes in my coaching practice, I'm working with a leader that has spots to fill, and he or she might say, well, I'm not interviewing because I'm not getting any candidates from HR. Like, I'm just not seeing anything good. The resumes aren't strong. And I say, the best talent is found, then trained. And what I mean by that is anybody that you want on your team is probably busy being successful in their sales role and not applying to your job. Mm-hmm. So how do you overcome that?
You nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. I mean, first of all, you don't rely on HR. I don't believe. As a sales leader, I mean, your company may work differently. You know, there's companies that work differently. Maybe they require that. But
so let's say, because I want you to tell us why you don't rely on HR.
Well, a couple of reasons. One is, I think if you're building the bench, you don't know when they're going to send resumes. I mean, because building the bench is very different than there's a job opening, someone applies for it, you interview. Building the bench is having this proactive mentality, not 24/7, but as one of your priorities as a sales leader or as a leader. I mean, CEO, same thing, no different. If you truly believe, right, there's thinking habits and skills. You may say it's important, but if it's not on your calendar, you don't necessarily believe that it is that important. And so I just don't think waiting for someone in HR and to send a resume it's not good practice. And that includes the reference checks that I talked about earlier. That should be done by the leader, not by anyone, as not a recruiter, not someone in HR, but the actual leader for that particular role.
We're going to get to the reference checks. I haven't forgotten about it. I also believe that it's not fair for HR to interview salespeople because they're not equipped. Okay, so, and I'll give you some examples. I cannot think of a time where an HR person sent over a resume, they did the pre-qualify, real quick call, and they didn't love them. And the reason they love them is most good salespeople, even some of the bad ones, are pretty likable. So tell me why you think that they're just not. I mean, do you agree with that? Are they just not even set up for it? And
I do agree. Although I will say, if you have HR and then you have someone that's talented in talent acquisition, that's a sales role, and so, it should be. And so, some would say a recruiter. It's different than true HR function. Like you have an HR generalist, payroll, benefits, what have you, and then you have someone that can be talented from a sales perspective. One problem with that is they may just try to sell that person on you, right, as the hiring leader.
Yeah.
So I just own it. I embody this. So again, put it in my calendar, building a bench. It's part of if you just look at my calendar right now, I mean, there's several hours in my week dedicated just to this. And I have 2 openings, but I'm going to consistently build my bench by having it on my calendar.
So like you, I love the Predictive Index. I'm certified in their talent optimization, and I use it in my hiring process. When does the behavioral assessment from Predictive Index come into play for you?
After we do a 3-step selection process. They pick us, we pick them, aligning expectations. I usually insert it into phase 2, which is we select them. So for me, selecting them is just it's basically a typical interview. After that's done, I like to do Predictive Index. I don't want to use Predictive Index to screen people out, although I definitely see the value in doing that. I like to do it to help come up with some interview questions in some cases, see if there's gaps, and if I believe that they could potentially be coached on that gap. Predictive Index does a really good job of offering up areas of opportunity in the form of interview questions. So I usually do it in what I would call phase 2 of the selection process.
Okay, so phase 1 is you select us, phase 2, we select you, and then 3 is aligning of expectations. I'm imagining the reference check this is where we're getting the reference checks, is in that aligning of expectations, right? I
So it absolutely is.
okay. Um, I generally don't accept provided references. Is that a good or a bad thing?
Well, it's a huge flag if they can't provide a very strong reference. And a very strong reference would be someone that was their leader at some point, and I usually ask for 2 to 3, and then I randomly call one. And then I also look for peer to peer, and then I also look for people that they've led. So I hear what you're saying, but I would challenge that a little bit because one of the components of just reference checks in general is, can they provide a very strong reference? If they can't, huge red flag.
And there's how do I understand the difference between a strong reference and what I would call like the milk run reference, where they've been prepped, they're not going to say anything negative about this candidate. So what's your kind of how do you begin to tease that out?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that's really important to me is that, especially from a leader to leader perspective, so if you're able to get someone that they have reported to, so I'll use that as an example. If they've reported to that person, I like to first kind of give them an idea of we're leader to leader right now. And so if this is someone that truly cares about them, they don't want to set them up for failure. So I do a lot of this is a very large responsibility. I do a lot of, you know what, we both know this could be a big waste of time for both of us. We both know that reference checks can be a big waste of time for both of us. I acknowledge that right from the get-go. But asking questions like, if leader to leader, if you had to pick this person to lead your company from a sales perspective right now, would you? If you get a lot of pause and you pick up on that, that's going to be a red flag. So acknowledging that these calls can be a waste of time, I think, is one way to break the ice, getting them feeling a lot more comfortable. I like to ask, not just weaknesses, but if you were to coach them right now, they were on this call, what are some areas of opportunity you would coach them on? And usually the first one, and I like to say, not the cliche, they're a perfectionist, not the cliche, they work too hard. I mean, what are some true areas of coaching that you would say to them right now, or if they're on this call? And usually the first one is something lighter. I go 3 deep typically, and that's where the concerns can lie. But it's, again, to kind of summarize that, it's breaking the ice a little bit, leader to leader. When it comes to that type of reference check, it's helping them understand the scope of the role, because again, they would not want to set them up for failure if it's someone that they cared about. And then would they be that person to lead their company from a sales perspective?
You said earlier,
fantastic input from those.
You said earlier that we all like to hire mini-me's, and I agree. We all have our own biases. I have a bias. I've said it many times to ex-college athletes. Where in your process, the 3 phases, you select us, we select you, aligning of expectations, where do you see biases jumping out the most in your team?
Well, phase one is allowing them into who we are and what we represent. Belief is that their values and beliefs need to connect with ours. And so we share a little bit about who we are in phase one. Definitely appears there, but phase 2 as well, and that's if you don't have a good system of criteria and you're actually considering them. I think sometimes we can get allured by someone that we've had a lot of chemistry with, or charisma, right? That was very charismatic. And so if we're not adhering to, if we're not considering the criteria that we've developed for ourselves, it can also happen in phase 2. Heck, I've seen it happen after phase 2 with Predictive Index, trying to convince ourselves that it's not telling us what we don't believe it, or we believe we can coach to it because we're that great of coaches. And I think that we've all been guilty of that at some point, right? I will tell you, for Predictive Index, I don't think I've ever gotten away from it and regretted it. Every single time I've regretted it.
When you've gone against the recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
And so you said that we all have, no one has a perfect record with hiring. And typically when we stray or unnecessarily damage our record with hiring, it's because we either A, don't have a process, or we over rely on intuition. What role does intuition play for you?
I think it's more experience, Nigel. I think, you could ask many leaders. They think they're good at this, right? They think they have great intuition. I actually believe it's experience. And so we talked earlier of how many interviews you do. You start to see things in people. You start to get deeper in your questioning. 5 levels deep, 6 levels deep in some cases. So I think, staying true to your system that you've laid out can be challenging, especially if you've not built the bench and you're trying to catch up with an opening and fill it quickly. You tend to, at that point, feel a little bit more desperate and potentially go against the system that you've created. But it starts with creating it. And it sounds so simple, but there's so many leaders that I talk to that just don't. They don't create one. They use what they think is they got this. They can figure it out. But you ask them and you challenge them to go back and any of the selections they made a year ago, and how many are still here today, and how many would they rehire? It's probably about 50%, if not less, right? We all know it.
Yeah.
It's almost common sense. It's almost too simple.
So there's some people listening that said, well, our company has a hiring process. Does the sales team need to be different? Does it need to have its own steps and discrete stages?
Yeah, 100%. We brought on Predictive Index for sales, and then we brought it on for other roles. It is different. I mean, it's a different set of criteria. It's a different set of questions. It's more peer-to-peer as well. It's more, I also created almost like a time management exercise where you have 50 things that day, and how do you attack them by priority? And it should certainly be the revenue generating first. We don't necessarily have that level of intensity in some of our other roles. So absolutely, it's different. It's very different.
How much autonomy is too much in the hiring process for a sales leader?
There should certainly be another set of, it's not like a make sure, but it's certainly another set of eyes. If you build criteria the right way and you're ranking people on that set criteria, having just one person do that does not it's too important to get it wrong. But having at least 2 people part of that process is really important to me personally. I think that I've seen really bad mistakes in selecting when we don't do that.
So when do you bring in other sets of eyes?
It's really who gets to it first. And I'm pretty big on time too. If someone comes in that looks talented, might fit criteria, there's a team of us, and whoever gets to it first, we know the selection process so well that it's whomever. It could be me. It could be someone at the community in my case. That part, there's freedom within this framework, if you will. And that's one of them. If you can get speed, almost like speed to lead when it comes to sales, it's speed to person, right? If they look like a good fit. So I'm not set on a certain order of people. I don't think titles matter in this case. And the hierarchy does not matter. It's whoever's involved and whoever can get to that person first.
But the takeaway is no seller should be hired and without someone outside of their direct sales manager participating in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes back to, we still get allured by people that are similar to us, and we get excited and like, oh, that was a great conversation. And absolutely.
Let's talk money.
Let's do it.
So you've had this situation where, and you've learned from it, I'm sure by now, when you love a candidate, they even not forget the intuition and your biases, they fit the profile, they've gone through the process, and the gap of what they need and what you can pay is seemingly impassable. How do you get creative in those instances? And what do you do?
Couple things. First of all, I expect it. Any good salesperson is going to negotiate. I would be disappointed if they didn't. So I'll just share that. I think that the next thing I'll say, like, let's say it's completely at your budget. Can't do it. No way, no how. To me, it comes to culture and development and what's important to them. So what's important to their professional development? Are they achieving it where they're at today? And I say where they're at today because I heavily align with what you're saying, which is they're already somewhere today. They're not running from something. I'm pulling them from where they're at. They're running towards something. But it's alignment and culture. And so for me, that's our culture is entrepreneurial. They have a say in the process. They have a seat at the table. As a leader, I believe in those closest to the work have the answers. People are attracted to that. Some people are attracted to that culture. We do have freedom within a framework. I believe very strongly, again, that sales leaders, good salespeople do not need to be micromanaged, but they need a framework. And so they may be coming from a place that says you have to make 50 calls a day or nothing, right? No guidance. And so I have seen some sales leaders leave where they're at to come for less because of the way sales was developed, the way they saw that they were going to be developed, the training, the mentorship, even the onboarding. So that's the first place I would go to is culture.
Is there anything you've learned about when to talk about money that prevents or to some extent mitigates this painful experience from happening for you?
This may be unique, but phase one is they select us. They can't select us if they don't know pay. So I believe in it very early.
So how do you do that? Like, what's the tactical? How do you do that?
So phase one, which is they get to know a little bit who we are. We have a culture deck we share with them. This is what our culture is. If you align with it, if you don't, great. Like, let's move on. Let's part ways. And if you do align with it, let's keep going in the process. As part of phase one, I share the comp expectations. I typically ask them what they're looking for. And if they answer, I'll let them know. But I typically say this is how it's budgeted. This is our bonus model, how it's laid out. And you'll see right away if there's any kind of pushback. It doesn't mean that we won't move on it, but I like them to know early on, because why waste time if it's so far out of range that it's not even going to be doable. So I know it's different. I mean, in my past life, I've waited till the very end. I think it works better early on.
I have this, maybe more than a hunch, I think it's probably a thesis, that it's pretty much a candidate's world right now. So why wouldn't you just talk about it from the beginning? And right. Because they have a little bit more of the power in the market right now, because I think there's probably more qualified, there are more open jobs than there are qualified sellers.
There are. I do think, though, to that point, which is if they're too caught up in base versus upside, I definitely have concerns in some cases. COVID has changed that for sales team, for our sales team and for candidates, because I don't know if you've heard this, but salespeople are looking for higher bases now because of COVID. They've realized that it's made a pretty big impact, especially if the company didn't adjust and pivot comp models. It's so important to be aligned on that, I believe, early on. Now, some people say, oh, wait till the end. They'll be more excited about the opportunity and then they'll take less. But that's not a win. I mean, that's not a win for them. It's not a win for you. You may get them on your team, but it's not going to last very long.
I'm with you. I don't like that. In fact, I like knowing down to the T the money situation, so that when they come in for their final interview, if they do the presentation well, we can make them an offer right there on the spot, and they leave with a new job.
I love it.
So let's talk about making an offer.
Yes.
What are your tips on making an offer?
So that's where we align expectations. I don't think it should ever be an email. It should be either face-to-face or by Zoom in this world. And it goes hand in hand with aligning of expectations. When I say aligning of expectations, it's what I expect of them as their leader and what they expect of me as their leader. We write it out. We talk about it. We write it. We sign off. It's almost like our own, it's not almost, it is our own written contract between each other, our own agreement between each other. That comes with the presentation of the offer. And so I think you have a lot of risk when you, and I've seen this over and over again, where I'll just email the offer. No, this is one of the most beneficial conversations you can have with them. And so it's Zoom, face-to-face. It's going through the details of the compensation. It's showing them, I left this out, it's showing them the low, medium, high of the upside. So if they can truly perform and get to here. I like to break it down as part of the selection process. We get personal. I find out their personal goals. And so I tie it in. You know, you mentioned earlier that you and your husband, or you and your wife, or you and your partner, or you want to buy a new house. Let's talk about what that's going to take. And, you know, a lot of people say do that in your one-on-ones later after they're on the team. But I like to align compensation, helping them see very early on how it aligns with their personal goals. So that's a very important part of all of this is sitting down and doing the offer the right way.
Are your offers contingent, or are they pretty much we're taking you on as a full status employee, or does it have some kind of checkpoint along the way?
It's full status, but we do, that's a whole topic of communication, right? We do what we call quarterly assimilation, and it's on our sales success framework, which has pillars that I developed with the team, with those closest to the work. And every quarter they know where they stand. I mean, we have weekly one-on-ones with all of our sales team members, so they know where they stand. Nothing's a surprise. So I never felt the need to do, in 90 days, contingency of any sort, because there's such a strong communication cadence on performance and metrics. Every week we send out rankings. It's, you can separate whenever you want, but it's clearly it's not okay to them if they don't know where they stand. So no contingency.
What do you think the first 30 days should look like for a seller?
It's setting them up right. I do believe in some trial by fire, but for the most part, I've created a 4 to 5 week training program. That's a combination of a lot of role playing, a lot of in the field, 3 days face to face. Even through COVID, we did small groups, live, tons of role playing. It's setting them up for success. It's really focused on the sales success framework that I developed with the team and the pillars that we talked about earlier, the sales pillars. I think for the industry especially, it's very robust. But if you think about people's learning styles, some are great, watching online videos. Some can just have a conversation. Some need role play. Some need to see it live play out. Some need to see you do it and then do it. So it's all of that. I take every kind of communication modality, every learning style, and pack it into 4 to 5 weeks. They are also doing some selling at that time with the support from the sales leader, from their particular leader. And then after 5 weeks, spread your wings and go. And the training continues on a weekly basis, but it's very front loaded, if you will, in the first 4 to 5 weeks.
Any final thoughts on interviewing or hiring?
I think the really important part is coming up with your own system. It's having your set criteria. It's looking for any kind of red flags. One thing that we haven't talked about is, what are some red flags when you're in the moment with that person? That victim mentality, that I versus they, that skipping around without a great explanation. And that mentality of the grass is always greener. I think those red flags are really important not to ignore. And so they may have done a great job answering the question that you had, but if you're really and truly listening and you're digging deep on every answer, just like we do in sales, right? You hear the response and you're like, tell me more about that. Where did that come from? Why did that bother you? Tell me more. If you're not doing that and you're not recognizing red flags, you could still go through the whole entire process as well as it's laid out as a system for you and still fail. Fail yourself, fail your company, and fail your team.
So, red flags. Previously, before COVID, there was a lot of final interviews that were done in person. Or at least at some point along the way, you laid eyeballs on the person. Someone did. That's not happening as much anymore. When you can see a candidate in person, you learn a lot about them. How are you getting to know those things in a virtual interview world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I found, not intentionally, that we've been doing more interviews. So for the one person, and so I think we do Zoom for certain. I find too, if I'm on the phone without seeing them, sometimes I can actually personally be more focused. But I would say, again, not intentional, but it's ended up. What I've noticed is that it's been more. So in other words, I may have one Zoom with them and I just need one more because I'm not feeling 100% like I might have if I was face to face, because we're not necessarily seeing the full picture from a nonverbal cue standpoint. But that is a red flag, right? If their nonverbals aren't matching up to what they're saying. And I will tell you, like, even with some of our interview questions, we've made some changes because of COVID. We made changes to our predictive index profile. I mean, B players don't navigate the storms like A players have, and it shows up. And so, yeah, we've done more. We've done more of Zoom because it's a little less confidence than if you were face to face.
So what are your Zoom red flags?
First of all, getting on the Zoom on time is one. It's if they're distracted, I absolutely love if they have children and I hear one in the background. I think it's a great way to really get to know somebody. But I think it's to me, Zoom is better than phone because you're able to see them, and it's looking for the same body language cues as you would face to face. Unfortunately, you can't see their surroundings and you can't see how they show up. You can't see what they bring with them. But it's still very beneficial.
Okay. So if someone wanted to follow up with you or connect, how do you find Nicole out in the world?
LinkedIn is probably the best way.
Okay. And we'll put all that, we'll link in the show notes to your profile. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your infinite wisdom on interviewing and hiring sellers.
Absolutely, Nigel. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Music from this episode is from my good buddy Justin Adams. You can listen to Justin's music in Spotify or Apple Music. Thank you, Justin, for the music, and thank you for checking out another episode of The Revenue Harvest.